Hey, I'm Rachel Billingsley.
And I'm Luke Billingsley, and this is GMT Talk, our insider podcast where we talk about all things GMT.
Today on GMT Talk, we will be interviewing Dan Bullock and Joe Schmidt.
Dan and Joe are co-designers of In the Shadows, a game about the French resistance during the occupation of France in World War II.
Joe is also the designer of Henry, a lunchtime Levy Campaign game about the Agincourt campaign. Both In the Shadows and Henry are currently on GMT's P500 list.
Okay, so let's start with In the Shadows. So we have a lunchtime game about the French resistance movement in Vichy, France. What were the origins of this design, making it a lunchtime game, and what inspired you guys to go for this particular theme?
So where we started with this particular project was with the concept game jam, basically like a weekend forming a team to design a game. I was actually late coming to this team. Chris Bennett, who was involved with the design the weekend of the competition, and Joe were already planning on working together on a game, though they didn't have a subject ironed out because we don't know what before the weekend you have no idea what the challenge is.
Right.
It's Project Runway is going to be my touchstone for this. This is how I view it, and I'm not sorry. But basically the idea was like we're given like a challenge to make a game under different constraints, and then based on those constraints, we're going to decide what the topic is going to be. Which, if you are just trying to design your first historical game at home, I highly recommend not doing it that way.
Make it way harder for yourself.
Sequester yourself away. Read a lot about it. Yeah, I like 18 months to 2 years, a good amount of time.
Yeah.
Better than a weekend per se. But yeah, so this project was very irregular in that way. And then it was the first design that I ever collaborated with other people. And Joe and I only knew each other from having met at SDHistCon in San Diego.
Yes.
One time.
Yes.
So yeah, I got your text when I was outside the liquor store. Just finished the run, and you're asking if I wanted to join both of you for the game jam, and I was like, yeah, I got nothing going on this weekend. That sounds great. Let's just bang out a game, right? So that was kind of how it started. And then during that weekend, so our challenge we found out was to design a game based off of the components provided in an existing published coin game, and then from there make totally different game, which was interpreted differently by different people, wouldn't you say, Joe?
Yeah, it was really interesting to see all the designs that came out of it. I remember there was Vagina Gara was one of the games that came out of this.
Yep.
There's another game on the P500, Rebellion
Britannica.
Rebellion.
That's right.
Rebellion Britannica. That's another one that was a part of this. Lots of others, but people took varying different kind of degrees and shades on it. I think there was one game that was created that was a Pokemon version of Cuba Libre.
Oh, wow. I would play that.
So everybody kind of put their own little spin on it, and then David Thompson designed one with one of his kids about like fantasy dragons or something like that, which I think was cool. But no, it was a fascinating thing to kind of be able to focus in on, like something that creatively normally takes a lot longer. And, I had started out focusing on making smaller designs, like smaller solitaire designs that I would put up for free as print and play games, just because they were fun and I liked them. And it kind of, going back to the lunchtime thing, I have 2 kids who are just turning 11 now. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of table space and I didn't have a lot of time to play games. So I would really focus on creating things that I could play in a short amount of time before I had to get up and go help with one of the kids with something, or whatever that could be. And I also we live in Berkeley, California. I had an apartment, didn't have a really big table I could set stuff up on. So there was this drive to create something kind of smaller, because I like things that I can, kind of play around with and fit in within a smaller time frame, but also something that had a good story to tell, because I really love narrative gaming. I think it's just there's something so great about sitting across the table from somebody else or a group of people, or even just on your own, and the story creating process that games can elicit is really cool. So yeah, we worked through, we took, I'm blanking on the Falling Sky. Falling Sky was, I always confuse Fire in the Lake and Falling Sky, two very different time frames, but the names are similar enough. But we took Falling Sky, and we took the board, and we were looking at it, and we were like, okay, so this is France, pretty much. And then it was Chris who had the idea of us focusing on the French Resistance, and then we were doing some searching around, and we found this incredible map. And what it was is, it was a map that was used by the various different resistance movements once they had kind of joined up together. And it was all the regions of France broken out into different areas. And it was how they organized their operations. This is a resistance movement, so it's not like they could freely communicate. So they had to be very targeted and specific in how they organized themselves within all the areas. And we looked at this map, and we looked at the map of Falling Sky, and we were like, these are pretty similar, huh? And then we said, well, what if we just put this map on this map? And then that worked out really well. And then we were talking about the idea of, we still wanted there to be cards in it. We're both big fans of card-driven games and the kind of variability, but also the fun that they can create. And we were like, well, how can we represent, because we didn't know a lot about the resistance at the time, knew a little bit, kind of the tropes that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
So it was okay, well, they didn't always have the resources they needed, and they didn't always have the information they needed. And it was like, well, what if we had each area be a suit? Each area was a specific color with a symbol. And, you have the famous resistance cross, and you have a variety of different versions of that. So playing around with that, and then setting that up, and then saying, okay, well, what if each of the cards has a numerical value? And that's like action points that you can use, but it's tied to the region or the area that you're in. And then Dan has been always, I think, in Dan's designs, is really good on creating events, and a variety of different events. And, like, one of the hardest things to do as a game designer is to create cards for a CDG, because there are a lot of ways to do it. But one of the things that Dan does that I really appreciate is all of them are unique, which is really hard. So like Dan went through and was like, okay, how can I make 18 unique cards that each do something different throughout the course of the game, which is something that, it sounds easy, but it's not. So it's like, okay, so we took this idea of suits, action points tied to suits, kind of a penalty if you're acting outside of that area, and then different events. And then we were like, well, how do we go from there? And then we said, okay, well, what if you shuffle everything together and you draw from the same deck and you have a hand and it's only 2 cards in your hand, limited choices. They also kind of continuing the representation of all of like the lack of resources that you would have, and not really knowing exactly what you were going to do, but acting off of the information that you had. So having these small hands and making these choices. And one of the really fun things that came out of that is the fact that sometimes you can end up with the perfect card that your opponent needs. And you know that you could use it too, but if playing it, because it has a special event that works for them, is going to hurt you. So you could just end up holding on to that very like vengefully the whole game, so they don't get to play it at all.
Yeah.
Even though it hurts you because you're limiting your options of what you can have in your hand, of what you can see. So there's this very fun like element of hiding information, keeping information, using resources, all of that. And it was this string that we found that we really loved. So we put the game up, and it goes in front of the judges, and the judges liked it. It was selected as one of the finalists, which we were kind of like over the moon about. We couldn't believe it. And then the craziest thing was GMT like reaches out to us. I think this was Jason Carr, and was like, hey, we want to publish your game. We want to put it on P500. And we were both just kind of like, what? Like, are you serious? Like GMT, like getting a game on P500 was like something that I had on like my bucket list as a designer. Like one day, because I had been going to SDHistCon, you know, as a game to mention earlier, and I had met with Volko, and I had, kind of chatted with him. I met with Gene, and chatted with him, and it was really great. And I was like, wow, it would be so cool to get a game published by them. But there's no way I'm ever going to do that. How am I going to come up with something where that actually happens? And then we get this game and we get this chance, and we're like, this is fantastic. And then we realize we don't really know anything about this subject matter. So then we really kind of dived into we found that there were like certain symbols that we were using that were like inappropriate, or like things like that just didn't really fit. So we had designed this in a weekend in a whole blur, and then realized that there was all of this stuff that we had to fix with it. And then I think, Dan, if you want to talk a little bit about our like research afterwards, I think it was super fascinating. And it really opened up our eyes to this whole concept of, rather than being the French resistance, it being the resistance in France. So Dan, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So we actually, that weekend when we were working on the game, I ordered a book that was pretty informative for kind of the overall process of designing this particular title. But it was Fighters in the Shadows, Guildia, is excellent. It was like 450 pages. So I only got through about 180 because I got it the second day we were working on the Concept Game Jam. So I read through like 180 pages while I'm simultaneously like laying out 20 cards and like working. It was pretty bananas. But
very impressive.
So that book was really informative because it had a lot of great material as far as like kind of little bios based on the lives of folks who had actually participated in resistance, the variety, like broad array of backgrounds that they came from. But it really did kind of drive home this sense that what we wanted to highlight in our game was, rather than the kind of de Gaulle myth about France liberating itself, it was specifically about this notion that many of the people who found themselves in the front line resisting the occupation were those folks who didn't have anywhere else to run to or go, right? So they'd already immigrated to France from a different home in Europe, and then and they kept getting pushed, and then eventually they're running out of places, like landing places. And I thought that the notion of also trying to highlight how, it's really tough when you're making a lunchtime game. Like, you have to abstract a lot and you have to pull away quite a bit. And the most important thing I think you're trying to preserve in a design is the feeling, the play experience. So like when we're playing a game that's about Cold War paranoia, it needs to make us feel Cold War paranoid, like while we're playing it. When we're playing a game as the resistance during the occupation, like we want the resistance player to feel like they have to tread a little bit lightly, that they're taking a risk every time they perform an action, and that by revealing themselves, they're going to be, potentially squashed. And I think that those things, that's kind of where our narrative of the game primarily lives,
Mhm.
and it was less about trying to lecture about our reading of the Resistance history. And I think that also it helps that the weekend we created the bones of this game, we didn't know that much about what that history was. Like it was
Mhm.
basically like an assigned topic.
Yeah.
And then borrowed components. So it was very, very odd kind of, angle on that.
Yeah.
But I definitely felt like when we were trying to put together the events of the game, even the events were less about talking about specifically the contribution of, say, this communist resistance outfit or their specific resistance newspaper. It was like you kind of have to comment on the role of clandestine press and like all of these underground newspapers. You have to comment on, like, there are some individuals that we tried to highlight, but it wasn't a game that was, like, because we have a limited palette of cards too. Like there's 20 cards, half of them are going to be resistance events. You have like an even smaller space. And that was actually something where I felt like Joe had a lot wider license to kind of explore that in the solitaire game, because then the player is in the driver's seat for just the resistance role, and then we're able to kind of automate to some extent the occupation, which is going to be a little bit harder to find some players who want to actually do those things. So,
Yeah.
Right. Well, that actually answered my next question, which was tell me more about the solitaire option. So
Yeah,
great.
I can dive into that. Okay. So it's true that we had kind of figured out how the resistance engine of the game was going to work. So in doing that, that allowed a lot of focus on, okay, well, how do you do this as a solitaire game? And as I was saying before, I'd created a lot of smaller print and play solitaire games that I'd put up on Board Game Geek and shared with people to play and all of that. So solitaire games were something that I really enjoyed, and solitaire design was something I really liked too, because it was one of those things where I didn't find the solitaire game that I wanted to play. So I thought, well, I'll make it. And, it's the classic thing. Like if something's not out there that you want, you can make it. So the real fun part of the solitaire design came in once we had this, like, in reading everything and doing the research, and one of the things I really like to do in historical research, especially when it allows for it, is to do like multimedia kind of research. So, and the French Resistance is a great topic for this, because I was able to read Gildea's book. I was able to find like primary sources. I was also able to watch movies that came out in France right after the war. And I was able to listen to interviews from people who were Maquis or who were in resistance cells or who had family who were. There was this one in particular, I forget the woman's name, that I'd shared with Dan and Chris a while ago, but this really beautiful story of this woman talking about her brother who was in the resistance movement, how she was like in the resistance movement as well, and how she would do these like small things to annoy the Nazi officers in her town, which was like equally a part of the resistance as everything else. So it's this idea of, okay, well, the resistance wasn't a monolith. There were a lot of different versions of it. There were a lot of different ways that people interacted with it. So how do you represent that in a game? And most importantly, how do you find a way to create solo kind of personas, is what we ended up calling them, that allow you to interact with the game in a different way each time you play it. So came up with this idea, doing the reading and looking over all the different groups, that you have 4 different personas that you can choose from. Each of them has a special ability, and each of them has a secondary victory condition. So for example, the FTP, or Franc Tireurs Partisans, who were a kind of a communist group, their focus was on lowering authority, which is the main goal for resistance, getting authority as low as you can and having the appropriate number of cells or maquis on the board to match. But they also wanted to spread like communist ideas and communist thought so that at the end of the war, when the occupation was kicked out, they would be able to position themselves as a major player in French politics. They saw it as the war was their opportunity to spread their ideology while also getting rid of the enemy. So for them, they have a goal to win the game. They have an ability where they can recruit anywhere, where normally you need to have a cell in the space in order to recruit. But then at the end of the game, there are 3 zones. They need to have a piece in every zone. So not only do they need to meet the standard condition, they also have to kind of be spread out across the map. And the more spread out you are in this game, the more dangerous it can be sometimes. Like focused operations, which is kind of what you saw historically, were the best thing to do because your Maquis could kind of kick people out. And then you would offer the sabotage operations that you needed in the space. And you could kind of move and operate together as much as you would want, kind of like in any operational, historical game or war game, what your focus is on. But that was just one example of a really cool opportunity to offer a completely different play style on the game. And then there are 3 other personas that you have. One of them is more focused on essentially like assassinations, finding collaborators and taking them out of the game. One is really like a punching Nazis faction where you go in and you're getting rid of all the occupation units and kicking them out of the country. And then the other is kind of lets you start off with a much better, stronger footing where you can use 2 of the suits interchangeably. But if you do that, then you have to push authority all the way down. So it makes it a real challenge. But it's this really cool opportunity that players have to have a solo game that they can play over and over again with a variety of different strategies and goals in the game, but then also be able to take that into a 2-player game to play with a friend where your strategy is like pretty much the same, which was one of the really cool things that we saw with it that we really enjoyed. And that was like the thing that we kept saying in all the meetings we would have in the design and development is, 2 games, 1 box. And I think that that's one of the things that we really got out of this that I'm so happy with is that for all the people who will get this game, they'll get a great 2-player game and a great solitaire game that have distinct differences, which I think is really cool.
That's excellent. Yeah. Wow. It sounds really immersive. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had a solo version of a game where you were playing as 1 player, but there were like 4 different like ways to play that 1 player, So like that's really unique. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's very fun. It's one of the things I was talking to Jason Carr about, and he was saying that he thought it was an idea that worked really well. So it's something I'm currently looking to implement in Henry as well too now. Trying to find that same type of concept where you have these personas of Henry that you can take on when you play the game.
Okay.
Work in progress. Though.
That's awesome.
All right.
Well, I think according to last month's customer newsletter, In the Shadows is going to the printer this month. So for everyone watching, you have a limited time to get your pre-orders in before the game comes out. So please do get their pre-orders in because it sounds amazing. And the link to that will be in the comments below. So let's talk about Henry, as you mentioned.
Great.
Another lunchtime game. The Agincourt campaign in 1415.
Levy Campaign now has 4 volumes out, I believe. Plantagenet is the most recent. I played it with Jason Carr last month. Loved the theme. Okay, it was great. A little hard to fathom for me, some of the rules. It was a lot to keep track of. So I was just wondering with Henry, would you consider it like easier, a more entry point? Is it different? Like, what can you tell me about it?
Yes, I think so. One of the big goals in the design is you know, is the idea of distilling Levy and Campaign into like the basic core, but then also not distilling the quality of the game. So you're still doing the basics, like the basic focus of Levy and Campaign. And I think one of the things that makes it hard is, on top of the strategy of deciding what you're doing, you're also focusing on the logistics, and the logistics are brutal in the game. You have to feed,
Yeah.
you have to have enough cards. Like, you have to plan things out so that it's done in a way where you don't end up somewhere with the totally wrong army, with no food, with just like, you know, just in trouble. Like, it's super hard, but it's one of the fun things in that system is that when you get it right, it feels really good. And also the storytelling that comes out of it, like in Plantagenet, it's so fun. Like, you'll go off somewhere, you think you have a great army, then like your lord gets exiled to Ireland, and then they're stuck there, and then you have to bring them back in, and it's a whole thing. So in Henry, the big focus was, well, I knew from the start, I want to make a smaller map. I want to make it a very focused campaign. I want to have all the basic things that you can do in a standard Levy and Campaign game. You can march, you can supply, you can forage, you can siege, you can do all those things, but really break all those elements down so that the weight of the game and its complexity is understanding why you would do each of those things, and then having a pretty simple victory condition, and then also adding in some additional flair that takes away some of the burden that the game can add in with the complexity. So, like, for example, there are no, you have the Arts of War cards in the Levy and Campaign series. In Henry, you still have Arts of War, but they're a little different. What I did is I broke it down so there wasn't an event that was just happening every turn. And there wasn't this big deck of Arts of War cards with capabilities that you could select for your lords. It's limited. There's 4 Arts of War cards for the English. There's 5 for the French. They only have capabilities. There's no events on them. You can purchase them when you're building your army, and you can add them onto a lord, and they have a special effect which helps you out in some part of the game. But the events all got pushed to these encounters, which happen when you forage as the English. So the English are kind of driving the narrative because they have to look for food. There's a couple places they can supply, but other than those 2 places, it's really hard, and they have to forage. So as they're doing that, each time they do, they flip a card. So think, like, for those of you who have played Jess of Robin Hood, how you have the traveler deck, and each of those travelers can be different. It's a lot like that with the encounter deck, where each time you take that action, you flip a card. That card will tell you if you get a provender, so if you were successful, and then there's some type of event on it. If it's a blue event, it's normally bad. So like my favorite event is dysentery, because that was a thing that happened a lot in sieges. So if you're a besieging lord and you flip that card, there's a very high chance that you're going to lose one of your units from your thing, unless you you bring the wine asset with you, which allows some rerolls. And there are some, the game isn't, the game is easier to understand the basics of, but there are still things added on that if you want to add them on, you can. So you get that level of complexity too. But back to what I was saying. So there's these blue events, but then there's also red events. And the red events are the positive events for the English player. But in order to take those, you have to pull them out of the encounter deck, which is only 18 cards. And then there's 1 card that recycles that deck. So each time you're pulling one of those cards out, you're lowering the odds moving forward of you being able to get resources. So it's kind of driving it a little bit, adding some fun elements to it and replayability and all those things. But I would say in general, working with Chris, who's the series developer and working with Volko, Henry's really fun because it's small, it's approachable. It's going to give people the ability to play through this really exciting campaign, but it's also going to help them better understand the way the system works so that they can approach any of the games and say, okay, I get this now. Like, I needed to do this because of this. You know, I needed to do this because of this. But still have the kind of fun bells and whistles if you want to add it on to do that, which has been one of the fun things about the development of that game, is looking to, like, okay, if I just take the core of the game with like just units, just a couple things, is this fun? And the answer is yes, it is. It's like, okay, and then if you advance past that point and you want to add in things to it, is this also fun too? And it's like, oh yeah, this is fun too. So allowing players to scale the complexity up and down is a really kind of important focus on it.
Mm.
I love games
awesome.
like that where you can kind of just tweak it how you want. You know, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that now. That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Cool. That's good. I'm glad that you're excited about it. I'm excited to, I think the system is so fascinating. You know, Volko is just so great with the way that he thinks through these things and kind of fosters the creativity around them. And I'm so excited to kind of continue the work on that and get that closer to being on people's tables.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that one of the ways you simplified was kind of simpler victory conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a little bit about what those are for each player and how they can achieve their victory?
Totally. All right. So for the English, it's very simple. The game works on a different scale. Most of the games are each turn is 40 days, which represents a service period. That's not the case in Henry. In Henry, each turn, there are 5 total, is 15 days. So you're talking a much smaller time frame. Yep. The game starts out with Henry building an army. And to build that, what he uses is something called a royal burden. So that represents all the taxes he's taken out, loans, you know, pawning jewels and doing things like that in order to get the funds that he needs to build his invading army. Okay. So you do all that at the start of the game. So you're kind of hedging a bet. You're saying like, okay, I am going to set up, I'm going to invest 10 royal burden into building this army, knowing that I need to get all that amount back in order to have a successful campaign. Because the reason why Henry launched the campaign into Normandy, there are a couple reasons, but the main one, at least from my understanding of the history, is he needed to do something to prove that he was a legitimate king. So his father, Henry IV, was a usurper, took the throne, wasn't his, made it his. His father dies, Henry comes in, so everybody's looking around and they're like, well, who's this guy? And he says, okay, well, I have to do something to prove myself. And we even see that because there's the Southampton plot that happens right at the start of this game, where a couple lords were going to try to assassinate him and kill him. Mm-hmm. So you see, like, he was on very tenuous ground. So he realized that he had to show to everybody, this is who I am, this is my authority, like, I'm going to prove it all to you from this campaign that I do. So you set your royal burden and then you land. And then you achieve that back by capturing enemy lords, by capturing strongholds, through a variety of different things, through play as you move around and commit to your sieges and fight battles and things like that. And then also just being in France reduces the royal burden. So the length of your campaign, there's a special rule where if you do the historical route, which was the Harfleur to Calais, you can reduce the royal burden as well. Okay. For the French are on defense, so they are not ready at the start of the campaign to fight Henry. They have to build up an army. So they have to tax, they have to muster, they have to do all these things in game. They do have a levy phase, but it's a little bit different than in the other games because you're getting your forces during play. So they're like rushing, doing whatever they can to create something that can eventually fight and stop Henry from gaining his objectives. The French player's sole goal is to capture Henry in battle or to get him off the map by having his service like a service penalty, essentially a morale thing. Okay. Like everybody gives up on Henry, they win. That's the only way the French win. So the victory contingents are super simple. It's kind of a victory point game for the English, but for the French, it's building an army, catching Henry.
Cool.
Okay.
Very simple. Reminds me of Game of Thrones. It's like Robb Stark. It's like find Robb Stark and kill him.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Well, Henry is also on our P500 list, and we're going to add a link to the show notes also for that below for you guys who want to pre-order. Everyone should pre-order.
Definitely.
Joe, I have a question. If you create a micro game about dysentery based on the subsystem that you wanted to implement in Henry, does Volko get a royalty from the dysentery game?
I think that would be my that would be a part of my dysentery system that I would do with GMT. So be on the lookout for that.
I'll keep my eyes peeled.
No royalties on the game within the game.
Yeah, the game within the game. Yeah.
Well, SDHistCon is coming up, and all three of you have been, and I have not been.
That's right.
So, Dan, starting with you, and then Joe. I don't really need to hear from Rachel.
That's fine. I've been once.
What would you say is one thing like I need to do while I'm there, or just what is it like? What might I see and experience?
I think the standout thing for San Diego is kind of the ratio of designers to players who are attending. There's just a lot of new games, unreleased games to look at. I like to just walk the floor and gawk. A good walk and gawk is like perfect for me. And I realize that most people probably want to play games, probably first and foremost.
Yes.
But I'm always excited to like see the things that are coming out. So I can be really obnoxious when I fly home, and then friends are asking me about various games, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I played that." That's kind of like the prick thing to do. But yeah, so I definitely recommend like just looking around as much as possible at the designers who are bringing a lot of the unpublished games there to get new players to kind of try them out. And it's just like a high concentration of very sharp people, both content creators, players, and designers, to get really pointed feedback on a game. So I'm usually more inclined to bring a game to SDHistCon and demo it when I still see the stink lines kind of wafting off of it, like kind of early, just because I like the idea of other folks kind of, laying blows and kind of like giving me the difficult feedback right away before I've become too married or wed to any given concept or mechanics in the game.
Okay. Cool. What about you, Joe?
I mean, it's always lovely to go to San Diego in November. I think it really is such like a meeting of the minds type place where I always, like every day that I'm there, I learn something new, whether that's like a little historical tidbit or getting to see a new game that somebody's working on, or just to play something that I haven't played in a long time. I think my favorite thing from last year was there were these great seminars that went on. And it was really awesome because you had people with a variety of different levels of expertise and interest and a million different things who were all getting up and talking to people about something they're super passionate about. And it's always so great to hear people talk about things that, they love, that they're passionate about. And it's such a great audience and such a great group of gamers who are there because everybody is like really into our hobby in a really positive way. And everybody's excited, everybody's checking stuff out, and it's just a really, really cool experience. We also have, for people who come in, a ton of great giveaways, great opportunities to try up and coming games, to find like your next favorite thing is really fun. And the crowd of people who come is just it's super fun. It's my favorite event of the year for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the suggestions.
Well, not that you asked me, Luke, but I recommend meeting some of these people who are all showing up for this event because they're all extremely kind. That includes like different publishers that I've never met until last year, you know, different influencers, different people from the San Diego gaming group. I forget the name of it. It might be SDHist. I don't know. Anyway, those people, they're great. Highly recommend you just meet everyone because they're all really nice. And supposedly Harold is getting a tiki boat. I don't know. Is that happening?
I've heard tell of it. I don't know for certain.
I've seen it on Twitter, so it must be true.
But yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
I hope that's true.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah.
T-boat would be really cool. Just blasting Jimmy Buffett nonstop. I'm all in.
So Tiki, we're both
yes, Jimmy Buffett, no.
So I believe, Joe, you're on the board. Are you also on the board, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you give us a little bit of an inside look about what goes into planning a convention like this, or even one of the others if you want to talk about one of the others?
I think Joe could give the best explanation of what goes into the planning of the event, because that's kind of more, that's more of a Joe thing. That seems like something that Joe would do. It's very event forward.
That is I think you could call that a Joe thing for sure. It's really fun for me, at least. It's all about, for anybody who's interested in doing this, like locally, the first big thing I would say is venue. Like making sure you find a good venue that's not too expensive, that's close to like the various different amenities that you need, like walkable restaurants and bars and coffee shops and things like that, with hotels nearby. Pre-COVID, it was a little bit easier to book whole like hotels, which was where the convention originally was. It was at a hotel like a little outside of San Diego. You could get a room there. They had the whole 2 ballrooms that you could set up in. That's changed a lot post-COVID because there were a lot of backed up events, and now I think just places are charging a little bit more for that. So we're very lucky we found the Portuguese Hall in San Diego and Point Loma, which is really nice, right by the water, right by a lot of good food and restaurants and bars and stuff. So you need to find the right event space. And then you need to make sure that you have everything on the back end covered in regards to how you are allowing people to register for the space, you know, like getting people set up for events and stuff like that. We use I think it's called, what is it, Tabletop Events? Yeah, Tabletop Events is a website that we use to help run that. That's really great. And then we also do a lot of communication through Discord and stuff like that. So, you know, finding the event, having some type of way that people can buy tickets and then schedule events. And then we spend a lot of time focusing on getting people there, and making sure that we're getting, you know, people who have exciting projects that they're working on, you know, well-known designers who have new projects or have older designs that they've done that are really cool, bringing in publishers, bringing in, you know, content creators around the hobby and stuff, just making sure that we're creating a space that is like diverse and inclusive and accessible for everybody, but where you know that every person you talk to is going to be a great conversation. I think another really important thing in the planning and setup of events like this is making sure that we are being super thoughtful of the people who it's their first time there, because all of us were in a position where it was our first time somewhere,
Right.
and that can be a scary thing. The first time I went to SDHistCon was when I first started kind of officially designing things, and I went, and I think it was either that year or the following year that I met Dan, and it was like a nerve-wracking thing to go somewhere and to have never met anybody and to be sharing like your art, like design stuff that you're working on. So it was a nervy thing, but everybody made me feel so welcome and everybody was so kind. And that was really important. So I think that if you want to run an event, you got to get a great space. You have to have all of the back-end logistics set up. You have to do the work to make sure that you get the people you want there. And you also have to leave the door open for people who maybe haven't been before or maybe are going to be new members of your community. So if you include those 4 things, I think that's 4, then you're good. There's a lot of other stuff too, but off the top of my head, those are the big 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Mount
Rushmore
Rushmore of event management. Yeah.
Now, if I think this is true that there's still tickets left, possibly.
I think so.
A few?
Yeah. Don't quote me.
I bet
I
you could
checked
count
yesterday,
on
they were-
one hand right now. I feel like
Yeah,
it's that few at this point.
Wow. Okay.
And
But the tiki boat might allow for more room. I have no idea how that works.
The other thing I'll say though is that if you can't make it to San Diego, we do a couple online conventions, which are great, which bring that whole vibe and atmosphere that we're talking about now right to your desktop computer or mobile phone or iPad or whatever you like. So, we really are focused on spreading out and sharing as much as we can to kind of open up the tent so that we can create and continue to foster our great community.
That's awesome. One of the things that you mentioned that you loved about it, and one of the goals as far as creating the space for the convention, is that it's welcoming, right? And that it's accessible to new people and things like that. So another thing that SDHistCon does is you guys have the Summit Award that you give away, right? Which I don't know all the terminology, but you can fill in or correct me. Basically, an award for the game published in a certain year that is helping. It's like a really accessible game in the war game category. Please help me.
Yeah, no, it can be something. It's usually about broadening kind of the reach of our corner of the hobby, right?
Okay.
So for the Summit Award in 2024, we'll be looking at a game published in 2023 and recognizing it for kind of ease of play, ease of teaching, kind of that accessibility. But also we're looking at games that have like a novel approach to established topics or a novel topic that has virtually gone uncovered, like in historical games. And this kind of allows recognition for games that touch on history, but it might not be military history in a lot of cases. And in some cases, it will also offer an opportunity to acknowledge and recognize designs that do touch on things that are more kind of kinetic conflicts, but they're just a bit more accessible than what we would kind of associate with, historical games and like kind of wargaming in general. And I'll be honest, like that kind of creates like a wide enough spread for everything that we would recognize, where the first year of the award, Red Flag Over Paris won, and that makes sense. It's a novel approach to a uncovered topic. And it also is, in addition to like covering a historical topic that there aren't a lot of games about, it's very accessible to new players and kind of a broader kind of approach type of game. But for that same year, Atlantic Chase was one of the other nominees. I wouldn't say Atlantic Chase isn't approachable, because that rule book is chef's kiss. But I think that it is just more that it's a kind of bonkers game in terms of like what a fresh representation of like kind of naval engagements during World War II, with the little sticks measuring out like the trajectories and like not that fog of war happening at a table where no one has to avert their eyes or get an umpire involved or throw a sheet over your opponent. Everyone's had to do those things. But I think that it's like kind of cool that the same award can acknowledge, you can nominate two very distinct types of games and even more. So last year's winner was Votes for Women by Tori Brown. It was published by Fourth Circle. And we're very excited to see who the nominees are this year. We just sent out the survey to folks kind of trying to get the public to respond with a game that they would like to see nominated that was published in 2023 for our summit. And then after we've received the public nominations, then our board and advisory committee will get together and then we nominate 3 of the 4 games. And then from there, we're going to actually at the SDHist event in San Diego, we'll actually offer demos of every single game that's nominated. So people will actually be able to play it. It'll be like a petting zoo for nominated games.
On a tiki boat.
Yeah, so a tiki boat, holding a board game like it's a baby goat, maybe eating a kibble, who knows? Yeah, so something along those lines. But yeah, so it's really kind of cool to kind of see that kind of process unfold. So I think the hope is that we'll have all of our nominees kind of organized by the end of September, and then we will be able to showcase our nominees at the event in November. And then after SDHistCon in San Diego, we'll convene again with that advisory committee and board, and then we will select one of the nominees to be the winner of this year's award.
Gotcha.
Cool. I look forward to seeing the nominees.
Yeah. So in addition to that, we've got another award that we're actually going to be adding this year to the process. And I'm not making this up on the spot. This is Joe can vouch for me. Like,
I've heard about it.
I vouch.
The board knows about this. We've discussed this at length. So we are also going to be unveiling a new award this year to recognize kind of outstanding content covering the culture of our hobby. And that's the Bobby Nunez Memorial Award. Bobby was our first editor for the Conflict of Interest zine that SDHist puts out. And he had, for those who don't know him, didn't have the good fortune to meet him, he had a very infectious enthusiasm for the hobby. It was just very tough, I think, for him to contain. And it just sort of exuded from him. Like if you were at the table with him, it is something that caught on with like everyone there. Definitely the type of person to invite someone who is kind of hanging back to the table and just in general, like shared this enthusiasm and kind of everything that he did with his beloved hobby. And so we kind of like to use the opportunity that the Summit Award affords us every year to also branch out and try to recognize like outstanding content, whether that's in the form of a video, a podcast series, even like a series of articles or an essay or any kind of written content too. So those nominees will be something we'll also be convening with our advisory board to kind of discuss. And in our survey where we're trying to get suggestions for games, we'll also be asking people about the kind of content that they've been reading, listening to, and watching over the course of 2023 that they would like to nominate for that, or would at least like us to like take a look at and consider.
Cool.
It's a great idea.
I like that idea.
Well, okay, before we move on to our recurring questions that we always ask, do you guys have anything else about the con or Summit Award, anything else you want to talk about?
Joe muted. I could tell he had nothing to say.
I have nothing to say.
And then clicked, and I saw the mic, and it was just
No, I'm ready. Hit us with the questions.
Okay,
All right.
So for both of you, do you have a favorite game by another GMT designer? And what is it?
This is so easy. For me, it's Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, Simonage. Like
Okay.
That's fantastic. Joe?
Cool.
I love Time of Crisis.
Okay.
I played so much of that game, especially on Rally the Troops. It's just a really fun game. It's one of those ones where it's like you like wait for your turn when you're playing it. Like you're so excited, you're just like, I can't wait. I can't wait for my turn. I can't wait what I'm going to do to everybody. Like they're going to be so. I really enjoyed that one. And then recently, I played with my with like the local gaming group. Here I Stand, and that one was really fun too. I love those narrative, like that really make you feel like you're in the role. Those two.
Yeah.
That's so surprising, Joe. Picturing you doing Here I Stand.
I know.
Your design aesthetic is so, you're like the Coco Chanel to my Mr. Bungle. Like you're just like trying to edit. And then I'm like, let's just make it real big. Let's make it messy.
I know. And I think that's one of the things about it that's so appealing to me is that it's just so grandiose. Like when I look at Here I Stand, I'm like, this is like 5 different games in one game, but like that's what's so cool about it. Like you're like, ooh, I'm gonna do this. Like this is really fun. So yeah, I love those types of experiences.
Cool. And you don't have to worry about making it work as a design. It's already done for you, so you don't have to worry about how to make all the 5 small games. Yeah. That's cool. Okay, so a similar question. Who are 1 or 2 people in the hobby who've had a positive influence as you guys, as game designers, as just game enjoyers? Either way.
I can start. I'm a huge suck up. So I would say for me the biggest one is probably Harold Buchanan, because I came to the very first, my first SDHistCon was 2016, and I wasn't even designing. I flew from Milwaukee to just go there and check out some historical games and then bother designers. And I did all that. It's great. But after going to a couple of cons, I met Harold, and it was the summer I was pitching my first game, and he had introduced me to other publishers and and other designers too. Like I met Amabel Holland, I met folks from like Revolution, like from all these other game companies and like other designers. And it was like kind of this like focused networking effort. And I think about that all of the time, those doors, and like him making those introductions, because I've been able to do that for other designers and just kind of pay it forward. And now even like, maybe it's a sign of getting old and farty, but I'm now going to get to see that happen with them. They're going to get to do that too. So that's kind of that sort of, kind of treadmill, like seeing that kind of escalator, like kind of move forward and upward. Like, but yeah, so Harold was definitely like pretty instrumental for me.
Cool.
That's cool.
I think for certain, Volko has always just been so kind to me, even from like the very beginning, like playing like my little printed out. I made this like tiny little game about Spanish guerrillas, and I played it with him because I brought it to show it. And he was just so kind to me about it. With the Henry stuff, he was so kind in, helping me along, and not just giving me the opportunity, but also the space in the design to do things that I wanted to do and to tell my own story. I really appreciate it, kind of like a debt of gratitude. And I think along the lines of what Dan's saying, that feeling that like, that's what you're supposed to do. So that now, like it's very important to me that I pass that on to others, that if people are interested in design or working on design, that I have an opportunity to talk with them and, help them and give them ideas and stuff like that. Because I think that so many people in the community are just so focused on making the space better for everybody. And that's just a really uplifting type of community to be in, because not every community is that focused on lifting people up. A lot of communities are very focused on like lifting yourself up and pushing everybody else down along the way. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But you're
That's
still not
great.
going to share your dysentery money with him? Is that my
Well,
understanding?
no, as we talked about, the dysentery system is my own thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, separate from
Should be
his work.
lifted up on its own.
That will be.
Right.
That'll
Yeah.
I'll step on heads and shoulders to get above the rest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All hail dysentery.
I'll handle this.
This interview's a mess. No, I'm just kidding. Bye. Well, that's all the time we have for GMT Talk today. Thanks, Dan and Joe, for taking the time to talk with us and for being our guests.
Yeah,
Thanks for the
guys.
invite.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Loved it. Great chat.
Thanks. All right, we'll see everyone next time on GMT Talk.
All right.